I still remember the cheap folding chairs wobbled each time someone leaned forward, and the fluorescent studio lights buzzed above us like an anxious wasp. Even now, when I'm standing by a marble counter dicing shallots in silence, sometimes I catch a whiff of hot dust and linoleum, and I'm there again, in that narrow basement on Avenue A, the afternoon someone laughed at me for wanting to be a chef. It was my cousin Valerie who started it. She always had a talent for finding the weak spot. Around the table were 6 of us, siblings, cousins, and a couple of friends from church. We'd been tasked to critique each other's life plans, an idea my mother called an exercise in accountability. I hadn't wanted to come, but my father insisted. "So Timothy," Valerie said, drawing out my name like a dare, "your turn." I cleared my throat. "I want to open a restaurant. Start as a line cook, maybe build from there." She blinked. Fleetingly confused. "A restaurant? Like flipping burgers?" I've rehearsed my words, but they dried up on my tongue. "Not exactly. I want to study French cooking. My voice shrank under her stare. "I want to work in high-end kitchens. New York has good ones." Across from me, my brother Eddie snorted. "What happened to med school or city college?" "She wants to be a chef," Valerie called out, miming air quotes. "Not even a baker, like cutting onions on TV with a big white hat." My uncle whispered a joke in Spanish to my aunt, who pressed her hand over her mouth. Even Grandma, who usually defended me, looked confused but silent. Valerie slugged half her Fanta, staring at me, as if she was waiting for me to laugh and say it was all a prank. "So you're going to get paid minimum wage and make toast for rich people?" Eddie said. "And you need tuition for, what, culinary clown college?" My mother's lips grew thin. "Your father works hard at the plant, so you can go to Hunter." "We didn't cross an ocean for—" I stopped listening then. The room collapsed into laughter, jeering, some pity. The only one not joining was my grandfather, who watched me with tired, watery eyes. I didn't cry. I waited for the floor to open up and swallow me whole. But the world never gives you mercy like that. You just have to sit, face hot and skin prickling. You have to take every word and let it settle inside. That was the first time I realized becoming a chef would be a private thing, a secret I'd nurse. I finished the meeting in silence, then walked 20 blocks home through a light rain, my sneakers squeaking and heart thrumming with humiliation. Things didn't get easier after that. My parents kept calling my idea a phase. Every dinner was a reminder, my mother's cheap roasted chicken, drier than paper, and my father pausing after every forkful to say, "You see, you eat to live, not to show off. No one cares about fancy sauces." I learned to be patient because I had no other choice. If I pushed, it'd only get worse. While my friends bundled off to college or city jobs, I worked in a bakery at dawn, then scrubbed pots at Carmine's for $7 an hour. Sometimes I'd eat leftover arancini in the alley, watching the restaurant's older cooks, brown-skinned men who barely spoke English, laugh and smoke. The kitchen's heat was different than home's, sharp, all-consuming, alive. Food had rhythm, urgency, artistry. No one cared about my surname, my father's factory job, my grades. What mattered was my knife skills, whether I could keep up. I was patient. I saved every tip, applied to culinary programs, and took the subway alone to interviews with heavy knives wrapped in a towel. When the French Culinary Institute called with partial scholarship news, I didn't tell my parents. I just started going, loading shelves at night, sleeping in snatches. At school, I was older than most and always tired. I accepted that. Most people quit. I did not. My instructors, Chef Renard with her neat French vowels, was strict but fair. The first time I ruined a stock, she made me taste my failure. Burnt, acid embarrassment. But when I filleted a monkfish perfectly on my 4th try, she looked me in the eye and said, That's it. Again. For 3 years, my life was noise and fire, slash and bruise, ruined fingers, and endless lists. I learned not just to cook, but to orchestrate a kitchen. Timing, heat, when to push and when to hold back. Platters of food started as chaos and became something clean, sharp, almost sacred. All that time, my family barely called. If I met them for a holiday, Eddie would ask, "Burn any roast beef lately?" Or Valerie would make a joke about my gourmet ramen. My grandfather just squeezed my shoulder and said, "You keep going, mijo." Sometimes that was all I needed. In kitchens, I rose from line cook to sous chef at a place in Brooklyn, a 20-seat French bistro with a stubborn owner and a staff who swore more than they spoke. My rent sucked my savings. But I found moments of joy, sending out a plate and hearing laughter return, being greeted by a customer's smile. Sometimes, after a long night, I'd think about the ones who laughed. My patience hardened, like sugar in a pan. It took almost 9 years before the turning point came. The chef at Folie, a small but acclaimed spot in Manhattan, offered me the head chef position after a trial week. I said yes before he finished his offer. The kitchen was old. The clientele picky, but it was a place where you could make a name. We worked 18-hour days. Sometimes I didn't see the sun for weeks, but my menu was my own. People wrote about us, first in blogs, then in magazines. A lonely weeknight brought in a New York Times food critic, and the next month, Foley got 2 stars. Suddenly, the small dining room was crammed until midnight. My face, tired, eyes underlined with shadows, appeared in magazines. I didn't tell my family. Part of me was still wary of their laughter, waiting to hear the sneers. If a stranger didn't care where I came from, why should my father? Everything changed one September when an old friend of Valerie's called to say she'd seen me in Eater. The news rippled through the family like shockwaves. First whispers, then cautious pride. When my grandfather died that winter, my father asked, quiet, if I would cater the wake. "A few things," he said, not looking me in the eye. "Just something decent." I made roasted lamb studded with rosemary and garlic, white bean puree, and bitter greens. I set platters in their living room. After the funeral, people pressed my hand and mumbled, "Delicious." My mother blinked, eyes raw from grief. Valerie was the last to arrive, wearing all black. She stood by the food, plate in hand, and regarded me. "So you actually did it?" "Yes," I said. "It only took a decade." That could have been the end. But the real return happened a year later. Foley's owner announced he was retiring and offered me the prospect of buying the restaurant. It was more debt than I'd thought possible, but I said yes. I rebranded, called it Nuevo, after the name my grandfather used to call me, his way of saying I was different, new. On a whim, I invited my family to the opening, all of them, my parents, cousins, aunts, uncles. I expected a polite crowd, but they surprised me. Everyone showed up. They huddled in the small windowed foyer of Nuevo in awkward clusters. My father in his best blazer, my mother clutching a sensible purse, Valerie in red lipstick. The staff led them to a round table near the open kitchen window. I stood in my chef's jacket, running on 3 hours sleep, hands sweating at my sides. My father looked at the exposed brick, the glassware, the pressed linens, and said nothing. My mother ordered water, scanning the menu with anxious eyes. As dinner started, courses slipped from the kitchen like small miracles. Beet tartare with hazelnut oil, seared scallops on sunchoke puree, lamb with what my mother would call too many herbs. Each plate was a memory, remade. From the kitchen pass, I watched Valerie take a bite. Her eyes went wide for a second before she masked it, glancing at Eddie as if he would see her secret. Eddie tried the chicken ballotine, turned, and mouthed something to his wife. My mother hesitated before forking a piece of fish, then put it in her mouth. It was after the main course, when the servers brought out bouillied grapefruit and tiny chocolate cakes, that the proof couldn't be denied anymore. Around us, every table was full, some guests in suits, others in t-shirts, eating quietly, savoring. The room thrummed with that particular warmth only a happy dining room holds. A man in a suit, a food critic from the Times, as some whispered, rose from his table and walked over. He found me by the pass and shook my hand. "That second course exquisite," he said. My father caught the handshake and straightened, piecing together the scene. The waiters, regulars, even the kitchen team all met my eyes, waiting. Valerie looked at me and said, "People here, they look happy." I couldn't help it. I smiled. That's the job. When the meal ended, my mother leaned in, voice soft. "It was beautiful, Timmy." She fumbled for my hand and squeezed it. "Your grandfather would be proud." Outside, after goodbyes, my father paused under the sign, its letters silvered with rain. He didn't say much, but his hand gripped my shoulder, tight, lingering a little too long for the city's cold spring. I walked back inside, heart strange, lighter, almost floating. I'd dreamed for so long of this return, the moment they would see for themselves, not just that I made it, but that my work had become real, solid, undeniable. But what I learned is this. Success is rarely a trumpet blast. More often, it's a quiet room, full at last, and the people you love finally tasting what you've been trying to share your whole life. That night, when the kitchen was closing and the white tablecloths were being whisked away, I stood by the window, looking out at the city's dark veins, the lights blinking in rows. I thought of that rainy walk home from the studio, all the laughter and the silence that followed. I thought of every humiliation, every quiet, bitter joke. I thought of my grandfather